My name is Scott Saluga. I am a senior wireless engineer or senior network engineer with St. Elizabeth Healthcare in Northern Kentucky. I've been in IT for about 25 years at St. Elizabeth for almost 15 now, and do a lot of stuff in the sky and on the lake. Okay, so St. Elizabeth was founded in 1861. We have 5 hospitals, 100 plus outbuildings, all wireless. We have 235 employees, and that includes all of our Epic staff and folks in IT proper, 5.5 networking engineers in infrastructure, and 1 wireless guy. That would be me. Is it normal? I don't know. I have heard of a lot of organizations that have very low wireless staff comparatively to others in their department. So with 7SIGNAL, this was one of the reasons why we looked heavily at 7SIGNAL, is because I was the only guy. People would come to me with issues or questions and problems. Sometimes I didn't have the insight or the time or the resource to go and investigate these issues that the complaints were about. So that was one of the big reasons why we decided to look at 7SIGNAL. So my current environment is all Cisco end-to-end. That includes switches, core, 3700 APs, 26s, 27s. We're not a huge deployment in comparison to a lot of other folks. I mean, there are folks in education and other healthcare organizations that are way, way bigger than we are. Talked to some folks at WLPC this past February, guys that are in education over in the UK. They're monitoring 30,000 plus access points a day. You know, it's just incredible. The guys from Walmart are monitoring a lot of devices. So comparatively, we're not that big, but yet we're down to the resource thing. We've got one guy who gets the blunt of all the calls and all the issues thrown in his lap. So you can see what we use what I use for troubleshooting. We use EchoHow. I still got some legacy air magnet stuff I keep around just in case I need it. Most of my surveys now are done in EchoHow. And of course, Peter McKenzie's favorite, OmniPeak, which is probably one of the best tools ever. So that's what we're using today. And this is why we really chose 7SIGNAL. Like I said, with being one guy, you get a lot of complaints. Voice over IP, the problem with this is that you don't really have a client unless you have an Android device. That was one of the main pushes for us to go to 7SIGNAL was Vocera, if anybody's familiar with Vocera. We had a lot of problems with their handheld Android device. And we had no real insight because the problems were so random and so far in between that we just I couldn't go out and shadow. We couldn't get enough contractors in the building to go shadow these folks to actually walk around and try to capture the problems that they were having. So 7SIGNAL came up and we said, you know what, we could do a trial of this, put some Mobileye clients on some of these Android devices and really see what's going on with the device. What do we find? We found out that a lot of devices just do not roam at all. They don't want to roam. Very sticky. Wireless on wheels, we call them WOWs. They used to be called cows, but they took that away for good reasons. And the generalization of the Wi-Fi sucks. So I was talking to Lane earlier before the meeting started, and we were talking about that. The generalization is you get these complaints where you go see a physician or a nurse, and they just say, well, it just sucks. And you try to get any details from these folks, you get nothing. You get, well, it just sucks. I don't know, it just doesn't work right. I always get dropped, or it doesn't do this, or it doesn't do that. Yet, as an engineer, you go and investigate, you try to replicate the problems, you can't find anything. The Wi-Fi is great. So with 7SIGNAL, now, especially with the Mobileye client, which is what we're generally focused on in our organization right now, you get data, you can actually go to the client and see actual issues with that client You can see how it's talking on the network, what it's doing. Is it having a bad roaming experience? Is it talking to a congested AP? Is it doing things it's just not supposed to? And you know, you're blind to the wireless network unless you want to set your head in front of a prime screen all day long, which we don't have time to do. There's just way too much stuff going on in healthcare in our organization with just myself. I can't be stuck in one spot staring at a screen. And Cisco and Prime gives you a lot of data. It's useful data, but it's not organized very well. And when you have issues and things that are going on, digging for that data is just way too time consuming. Right now we have about 600 of our 1,100 Mobileye clients deployed in the organization. Most of those are on WOWs. We do have them on some Android devices. And the data has just been incredible. We'll talk about that here in a second. And then the Sapphire Eyes, we're currently limited. We're still on our, we're limited by budget. So we'll be deploying more Sapphire here next year when the budgets are released. And then 7SIGNAL can give you the unattended active monitoring. So instead of sticking your head in front of the prime screen all day long, with 7SIGNAL, you've got a dashboard that you can go to at any point and really see what the Mobileye clients are doing, what they're seeing, what your clients are up to. And it really kind of gives you this red, green, yellow dashboard that kind of says, you know, hey, you need to focus on this or go look at this right away and see what's going on. So that's been very helpful for us with the WOW issues. So after our Mobileye deployment to all of our WOWs, what did we see? Well, it was kind of an eye-opener. Biggest thing is the third bullet point was driver versions. The client services folks that deploy these mini PCs, whatever comes on that box is default, that's what goes out in the field. Well, what they don't realize is that when those devices hit the field, the nurses and the physicians that use these devices, they don't care what's on them, they just use them. And when they have a bad experience, it directly reflects on me or our networking group about what's happening. So we're having some issues with working with client services to get the driver versions updated. We did find out that Intel does a great job of a silent install for the drivers. So the clients only see a quick blip of the network. So their Citrix session freezes for about 15 seconds and it comes right back. They'll get a little exclamation point down in the corner and then it goes away as the driver update just shuts the radio on and off. So it also showed us that there are clever people in our organization. We have physicians and things that like to just go to Best Buy and throw in whatever the hell they want. 80 megahertz, you can find this stuff. It's not rampant, but it's using 7SIGNAL, you can kind of go and see these devices out there, and then you can find out where they're connecting at and kind of go to the general areas where they're at. So that's helped quite a bit. Congestion, 7SIGNAL can kind of tell you if a WOW is having latency issues getting to and from an access point. So you can kind of focus in on certain little areas of the hospital and it kind of tell you, you know, are these APs overly busy or not, which then can lead you to go into Prime and research the problem further. So right now we're working with other groups inside of our organization, like I said, with client services and those kind of guys, to figure out the best processes to get updates and things pushed to the clients. That's been one of my biggest challenges, is working with those folks and help them understand that what they're deploying directly affects the reflection of the network as a whole on the hospital. So when those devices go out there and are having a bad experience because of a bad driver, you know, the whole generalization is the Wi-Fi sucks, when really it's a really simple fix to get it out there. And it comes down to resources and time for those guys. You know, they have their own work lists and things they have to go from. So we're currently working with those guys to develop the mitigation plans to get those problems remedied. Where's the other slides at? Where'd it go? Where's the other slides at? Oh, wait, no, here they are. Yeah, I think that was all.
Yeah. So Scott, so one comment I just want to add about driver versions. So who here knows off the top of their head the code version they're running on their WLAN, Cisco Aruba code version, whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
You know, most wireless engineers know it. Maybe know some of the bugs associated with it. Who knows what driver versions your clients are running? He does. If you think about it, you know, Wi-Fi network is just a network of radios, and the vast majority of those radios are clients. They're not AP radios. And it turns out those drivers that they're running can have pretty long lists of bugs associated with them, just like our controller code can. So having visibility into that is really helpful. And what you get with Mobileye is a whole, inventory of what those driver versions are. So it's very cool.
Yeah, and also it's kind of cool too with the driver version thing too, that you can get the actual OS version. So if, like right now, we're in the middle of doing a R&R on some of our WOWs, and the guys are moving from 7 to 10, and then we've even had updates of 10 while those new ones have been deployed. So they're trying to get up to speed and get on the latest with Microsoft. And with the Mobileye client, you can actually see the actual OS version of what they're running. And a lot of times with 10, depending on your SCCM deployment and who your guys are doing the update pushes, they may or may not know exactly what they've got out there. So the driver version really helps in us communicating to them, hey, you need to get this updated, or you need to do this or that.
Cool.
Any questions? Anybody?
So your the voice problem you had, right? So before you had 7SIGNAL, you had, a Android handset. So it was specific hardware with an operating system from a different vendor, with a phone, a voice app from a different vendor, and then your infrastructure vendor was somebody else. So you had all these cooks kind of in the kitchen, and you had this voice problem. So how did that work out, in terms of?
So what we ended up doing was we found out that through the Mobileye client on the Android phone that we were using, it was a Zebra phone, we found out that the roaming performance was they weren't roaming until they hit neg 75 at all, where compared to a Cisco, is it 8421? Is that right, or 8821? We had them side by side, just walking down the hallway, and we could show that to one of the Zebra engineers as they were there. But in order to get data, hard data, on paper form and show them actual graphs and stuff, we used the Mobileye client and the dashboard to show these folks that, hey, these are the RSSI values that the device is seeing, and this is the RSSI values of the neighboring APs that it sees that it's not roaming to. So you would see a phone at neg 85, they're getting one-way audio that they're complaining about, but yet it's seeing an AP at neg 65 or neg 60 that's right next to it, but it won't roam to it. So that was a big eye-opener for us and for them. And they, through their channels, went back to China or India, wherever they were, to get the firmware updated. And they had their engineers looking at the firmware. And we went through several iterations of firmware that just were very time-consuming process. All the while, you've got people in the field that have a device that just doesn't work right. So, lesson learned.
More questions?
Anybody?
Do you want to spend a few minutes and look at your Mobileye data and show some things here?
Do you have it? Can you pull it up? I don't have internet access. Yeah.
While you're,
Yeah.
mentioned driver versions and whatnot and SCCM. You must have BYOD. How do you manage that and performance?
So they have, who's our MDM? AirWatch. We do have AirWatch. The same guys that do the SCCM stuff, we have two guys that manage SCCM. One guy manages AirWatch also, and they kind of overlap each other.
One guy that manages the Wi-Fi.
Yes. Yep. So what we do is with these driver versions and things, most of it, since it is just mini PCs, it's all through SCCM. We don't have, most of the AirWatch devices are Apple iOS devices. So we have some iPads and stuff like that. But again, Apple is so closed that we don't get really any insight into them. And you have to have, for the Apple devices, with the Mobileye client, you actually have to run it in a foreground for it to do any real data collection. So that's kind of tough when they're working to have that run in a foreground. So we really try to encourage them to use an Android tablet or something like that, but the usefulness of Apple that everybody's so used to is what they lean to. So right now, it's all through SCCM for the most part. And like I said, with Intel doing the silent install on the drivers, we've proven that it's very unobtrusive to the end user. So we're working right now to get our first major driver push out. And then we can really see how things are going to perform after we get that. So here is our dashboard. St. Elizabeth. Yep. So if we go to reports.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go to reports, I believe, and we go to active client. Here we can see we've got, of our 1,100, we've got 413 active, oops, what am I doing? It's an apple, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an apple.
Everybody.
There we go.
So, yeah, so what are some of the ways you use this, like, on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis.
Like troubleshooting, with help desk in the game.
Yeah, so the biggest one for me is the reports, or the platforms. So if we go to platforms, this is a pie graph that I think Lane was talking about earlier before the meeting started. This kind of gives you all the driver version and roaming performance. Here's the that is the little phone we were talking about. So you can see 26 out of 33 constantly report that they're having issues roaming around. One of the things that we're working on that I've talked to Jim and the 7SIGNAL guys about is the overall color scheme that we're working with here. Red, when you go to show this to management, upper management, they see red and all they see is bad. And it'll report red because we want to know, as engineers, we want to know exactly what's going on in the network. Unfortunately, when you share this with upper management, they freak out a little bit. The red can be caused by just one single device, or it can be caused by many instances of a problem. So I've talked to them about it, and they're looking into the situation, how they can maybe redesign this to give us a better look at, or an indication of what's really going on.
Scott?
Yeah.
Yes, we're actually working on that right now. Within the next 1 or 2 releases, we'll introduce error rate. So instead of behaving the way you just described, which is accurate, right? And one bad experience would turn a cell red. It'll move to a error rate based approach. So for example, we'll set a threshold SLA for what's an acceptable level of roaming. Because there's always some variability, right? It's never ever going to be perfect.
Yeah.
I'll talk more about that during the roadmap later. But
Yeah, and that's one of the issues that I experienced in explaining this and showing this to management when I was trying to get them to purchase more 7SIGNAL. He kind of freaked out. He's like, "Oh, it's all red, it's all red." I said, "Well, wait a minute, let me explain it to you." And then for me to go into details with a management guy who really could care less about it, to try to explain the situation was a little deep dive for him, So But this is really, you work out of here and you can kind of see the driver versions and things of how they break this down. I love the way that it's presented, except for the color, but it kind of gives you a good insight. And then you can kind of go in and you just, you can pick a client and it'll tell you, for this particular client, it's been over the past 24 hours, it's had 40 roaming things. So what I'm guessing is that this client's pushed back in a cubby hole somewhere and it has just been stagnant and hasn't really been doing much at all. So that's kind of how I use it on a daily basis, is just through the dashboard. Yeah, you can kind of see at the top there, it's just kind of stuck.
Yep. Yeah, so you can see all the data that we're collecting from this machine. You can see connectivity info, AP names, and something that's new. Yeah, so we're scraping those beacon frames so we can grab the station count and channel utilization from the AP that the machine's connected to. So you can get some infrastructure insights from the tool as well.
That's really new, isn't it? That's just the last release, right?
Yeah, September? Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, very cool. Much more to follow.
Yeah, that's actually new to me. That would help me in a couple issues that I got going on right now.
Scott, you see that link down at the lower left?
Yeah,
Have you seen that one yet?
I did see this the other day.
Single click, one finger. There you go.
I did see that, and that was something that I had asked Jim about, because we want to know if you send one of your guys out to update a driver on a client, a particular 3 or 4 groups in an area, and manually update the drivers. I had asked Jim about wanting to be able to see when that was updated, to kind of get a history as if they were actually out there doing what they said they were going to do. Because a lot of times they'll tell you they update the drivers and they just go and look at it and then walk away and don't even update it. So this will kind of actually give you a history of the driver version, where they're to and from. And with us just starting the SCCM deployment of the driver updates, this will help quite a bit to see when those drivers get pushed out to the clients and when they get the new driver. So that's really cool.
Yeah, so it's not too big of a surprise to see some roaming issues with this adapter, because that's an old driver version that,
Yeah, 18
Field
Pro.
Services hasn't updated yet.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
Reports is really good. One thing that's cool too is you guys can set your own end-to-end. So we noticed a lot of times we had Google in there as an end-to-end. And Google sometimes wouldn't respond. They use that Akamai cloud-based thing where they have servers and different data centers across the country. Sometimes they were reachable, sometimes they weren't. So you can set up internal servers, or we also did name servers that sat at our internet providers' hosting sites, so that we knew that they were just the next hop outside of our network to see how that was performing. And they do very well. And it also helps you pinpoint too. If you get one that shows up really bad, it kind of leads you down the path of looking at the network path from the client all the way to the end device and back, and see if there's congestion somewhere along the way.
Yeah, if you drill into this report, it's organized by location and then by the list of affected clients. So, a Fort Thomas location has the majority of clients dropping connectivity to a certain endpoint. Maybe there's a WLAN problem, maybe there's a firewall problem. If it's affecting everyone, there's a good chance it's bigger than an individual client issue. So, very cool. Nice.
I do have a question for Scott and also you, Jim, as well. So, Scott, I know your network's not terribly large in the perspective, the big scheme of things. It's large for you. 'Cause
Yeah.
you're a single guy doing it. But have you ever had a need within 7SIGNAL to be able to drill down, not just to the client, the device level, but down to the user level, to see who is that user that is complaining about, I've got the CEO that. Have you ever had that need? Because last time I had checked, and Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and we're evaluating 7SIGNAL at the moment, so that's one of the questions I'm bringing up. I don't believe there's a way to have any sort of LDAP or Active Directory integration or some sort of directory services integration other than what is being reported by the app currently. Have you ever had a need for that?
Yes, absolutely. So you want to know who's on the laptop or who's on the device. Usually what I'll do is the path I follow is I'll use this to get me down to the workstation level, and then from the workstation I'll jump over to console 1 and run from console 1 through AD and find it that way, and then find out who's logged in and who's doing what. And then from that point, once I find out who that is, I can pass that on, create a ticket for a client services guy to go investigate that person. And if it's usually sometimes, like I said, we're a medium-sized organization, I guess you could say. I can just call the end user also too, and say, hey, I'm seeing this or I'm seeing that. Are you experiencing bad behavior?
It's a tricky problem because in healthcare especially, a lot of devices are shared, so we'll just have some generic login. And then end users are logging into Citrix or something else kind of rapidly. And so do we pull it from AD? Do we pull it from Citrix? That's a tricky problem.
It's a triangulation thing, but what do you really have? You always have the MAC address of the radio adapter, right? So it's not automated, but if you do an export you basically associate the MAC address of the adapter with the user, and give that to us. We can actually associate that
Is there a way to
name.
do that?
Yeah, we can associate the name, so you get the name of the person instead of the MAC address, or you actually get both, right?
Because when I'm handing that report to somebody above me in management that says, here are your top offenders or whatever, it's nice to not be able to have to do all that legwork to.
That's a good point. We can replace all the system names in Mobileye with a custom list. So it could be big important CEO's laptop.
Right.
And we just need a CSV, MAC addresses, and those nicknames.
Nice. Okay, cool.
Something to be aware of though too, from a GDPR or soon to be California, a couple other states, right? That everything in mobile and the vast majority of what is in Sapphire is described as pseudonymous data, meaning that you can't directly identify a person from it.
Or you're not supposed to.
Well, what it means is, and it's very formal legal definition stuff, right?
Yeah.
Basically, if you were to break into, let's say, 7SIGNAL site and go to St. Elizabeth's, with the information there, you would not be able to determine, which while that was, what person was on this particular device, unless you also cross-referenced it to the inventory at St. Elizabeth's to which person had that MAC address in their build, right? That's how you would do it. So pseudonymous means that you're not directly identifiable, it's indirectly identifiable. So the reason I bring this up is as soon as you import all of those nicknames, right, you now have directly identifiable personal information, which has a higher kind of hurdle, for its management, and often can make people nervous. So it becomes a question of what part of the world do you operate in, right, and what are their concerns.
Yeah, because then it's considered almost like PII, to some degree, right?
Yeah, you can directly identify a person. So.
So I was just going to add a question for you. Are you the sole user of Mobileye at St. East, or
Yes.
So have you thought about getting some of your operations folks looking at it, maybe getting the help desk looking at it?
Well, that's the discussion that I want to have with management.
Yeah.
What I'm afraid of is if I introduce that to client services and the service desk, is that I would get inundated for months and months and months about little issues that really have no concern. And they're just doing their job by being concerned about what they see, but they don't know the intricacies of the network itself. Where, when wireless started at St. Elizabeth, there was 5 symbol APs above the ceiling in one area of the hospital. And then when I got a hold of it, it was, hey, here's a box of 1230s, go put them in the ceiling. So that's how it started. So those guys don't understand the intricacies of the wireless as a whole in the organization or in certain areas of the hospitals, and if they would see problem, like take for instance this data right here, this first example here, you've got 3 sticky samples out of 1,300. So out of 1,300 times, and that was over just a day. So maybe that nurse walked around a corner or something, and it was sticky for just a minute or two. They would call me on that, where to me that's kind of normal behavior almost,
Right.
because she's just going around a corner. I mean, you wouldn't know for 100% certainty unless you actually went out there and saw it. But something like that is just, you can go here to the client and see. So she's running Windows 7, and look, the driver version's 18. So there you go. There's why she's sticky.
Yeah. So we kind of need to get over that hump from surfacing every single problem, you know,
Yeah.
red, flashing red details that it's helpful for an engineer, but especially if you're a Wi-Fi expert, but if you're not, you know, knowing the context about the severity.
Right.
Challenge.
And that's where I'm really apprehensive about sharing this kind of data with management or other groups, because I would just definitely get inundated. Hey, this is doing this. Why is it doing that? Why is it doing that? And it takes away from my time of actually doing my job and getting work done. So I use this on a daily basis. Every morning when I go in, I'll run a report on the bottom worst roamers just to see if there's any issues going on anywhere that I need to look at. And over the course of a few months of looking at it, you kind of can see, you just kind of know what you're going to look at, what you're going to see, and something will stick out as a sore thumb if something's abnormal. You know, you kind of got to look beyond the red, yellow, green thing to see what's really going on. So, you know, this is kind of expected with the 1812 and the Windows 7. But there's worse ones out there that are, just get stuck in a hole somewhere. Yep.
This may be more of a question for Jim from a 7SIGNAL perspective, but let's say you do run this report every morning, right, and you see the same offenders that are, you know, and you need client services to update that driver to perhaps fix the roaming issue, right? Is there any sort of planned integration or APIs or hooks into some automated, like, you know, help desk, like we use ServiceNow, but what about Remedy or something, to where if there's a repeat offender that's happening like every day, is there a way for 7SIGNAL to generate, maybe it's an email, maybe it's a API call that then creates a ticket for you, maybe not for you to resolve, but maybe it, you know, can dump it into a container that maybe desktop or client services can then go start investigating.
Yeah, so Sapphire Eye has that capability. It's a more mature product. So we've got email, SNMP, webhook, and an API for it. Mobileye is newer, and so that's we haven't developed that yet.
Okay.
But you know, certainly having those conversations and thinking about the right way to go about that. I don't know, Russ, if you want to add anything to that.
Oh, would you like to stand up and do the roadmap presentation?
Yeah.
Everything you're bringing up.
I'm clued in, yeah.
Right, so actually what you just described is the alarm framework that we're in the process of building and plan to roll out before the end of this year.
Great.
So the alarm framework is the big changes. We've already hit one, and they kind of all go together, right? So this is just mobile, but what I'm describing is already in place for Sapphire. So the alarm framework basically first is going to look and say, well, is there a trend, right? Do I see a trend? How do I do that? I have to have error rate, right? So get error rate and also see the dependencies between problems, right? All this kind of comes at the same time, because as soon as you have error rate and dependency, everything else just kind of naturally starts to happen, right? With that information. That's literally being built this week. The next thing that what we'll do then is we'll enable alarms where you'll have different thresholds, and you can set up rules like the one you're just describing, where basically, and we'll talk more about this in the roadmap, because I'd like this group's feedback on it, right, is the way we're thinking about triggering those alarms, right? Because, you know, just because one person had a roaming issue, you really don't want an alarm, right? You're probably going to want to know if this is above baseline, if 25% of the users at this location are experiencing, you know, roaming problems, then that I want to know, simulate for that. Or if this individual has had 6 test cycles of roaming issues that are pretty severe, yeah, send me an alarm. Right, so the main idea is look at the population in aggregate. What threshold do you have to be above to be told about it? And then look at any individual or any individual thing and say, look, if that thing sucked 5 times in a row, yeah, tell me, right? Because it shouldn't suck for 5 times in a row,
Right.
meaning 5 test cycles.
Yeah, otherwise it's gonna be an anomaly or whatever.
Yeah, because anomalies will drive crazy.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, you know, without 7SIGNAL, you probably already have a network monitoring system that has a green dashboard that says everything's fine, right? That's why we exist, because we show you the problems, the other stuff can't. But we've gotten really loud about just showing you the problems, and now we're gonna, you know, find that happy medium and incorporate that into alarms when people have to. Scott, anything else you want to share? Or?
No, I think I'm good. I'm good.
Any more questions for Scott? All right. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yep.
And ladies and gentlemen, Russ Wangler.